Hello, welcome to Books in the World. This program is in association with the Cape Cod Writers Center. My name is Richard Bodertha, and I'll be your host today. Our guest is Dr. Robert Reece. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
He is the recent author of a novel called Double Blind, Double Cross. He has also authored an earlier novel, To Tell the Truth. Dr. Reece, to start off with, I'll call you Bob, if I may, for ease of conversation.
Right.
Could you describe to us a little bit about your background? I know you're a doctor of pediatrics, and you did a long stint, 15 years, at Tufts Medical School, I believe.
That's right. Before that, I was at Boston Medical Center for 15 years, and my primary specialty within pediatrics has been child abuse diagnosis and treatment and management. Mm-hmm. So over the course of time, I've seen more than anyone's share of child abuse cases. I also did a little bit of private practice, private pediatric practice in Falmouth, where I live, on a part-time basis. Enjoyed that very much. It was a good break from child abuse cases.
I bet, yeah.
So I liked both aspects of the practice, and but
you're retired now, I take it.
I am retired. Clinically, I've been retired for about 10 years, or almost 10 years. My wife and I continued to publish a review journal called Quarterly Update, which had to do with child abuse articles that had been published in the peer review literature. And we did reviews of those. We had about 100 other reviewers that helped us put that out, and it was intended primarily for the child abuse physician field.
I see. Now, after retirement, I believe you have a second career as an author. Maybe this is something that you worked on even during your working career as a doctor, I'm not sure. But describe for us the evolution of how you came to be a writer.
Well, I was an English major in college, and I've always been interested in reading and writing. I do a lot of reading, and I did that all during the course of my medical career. But I didn't write any fiction during any of those years because I didn't have time, number one, and I didn't think I had the talent to do it. I did a lot of technical writing, a lot of medical writing. I edited 9 textbooks and did a lot of other research kind of writing. So I knew the craft of that kind of writing. Now, getting into fiction was a little bit trickier because after I retired, I thought, well, how am I going to use my writing skills? So I decided, what about an autobiography? And an autobiography sounded good to me for my family. I didn't want to publish it, but it gave me the impetus to go ahead and do a lot of writing that had nothing to do with medicine, except insofar as it dealt with my career. So I sort of cut my teeth on that, and I got mixed reviews from my family on that, so I thought it was okay to go ahead and
you survived it.
Try something else.
You finished the book, number one.
Yes.
That's the big thing. Now, obviously, you come from a background, pediatrics, child abuse, headliner stuff. Many people could see it as a novel. What was the germination of your first book? Was it based on anything that you took part in, that you experienced, a case that you were called into, or a combination of a bunch of cases?
Well, it was more a combination of a bunch of cases. I think To Tell the Truth is a story of a babysitter who is accused of abusing a child by head trauma. I was involved in many cases of abusive head trauma in my career, both clinically, that is diagnostically and in treatment, but also as an expert witness in court. So I was very familiar with a lot of different aspects of child abuse cases of that sort.
Well, that case about the nanny, I believe, brings intimation of a case goes way back. Louise Woodward, I guess.
That's correct, and this case in the Tell the Truth book is not that case. Right. I want to be very clear about that. It's about a fictional case that is a product of my imagination strictly, and that it is an amalgamation of a lot of other cases that I've had contact with over the years. It was an interesting thing to write because I was able to bring in, I think, some of the issues that come up in court. It's really a courtroom drama at its base. And having to describe all of the different kinds of things that both the prosecution and the defense in these cases can bring up, and how judgments are made sometimes oddly from the bench that influence the outcomes of these trials. So I thought it was a pretty interesting kind of exercise, and it was sort of cathartic for me too. Right. I was able to get a lot off my chest.
So you do have that background where you come from the medical side of things, but also as a legal cliffhanger in some of these cases, which you actually testified in as an expert witness or a clinical technician.
That's right.
So I can see how that would be why you gravitated towards the thriller. Is that what you call it, or a mystery or a thriller?
Well, I think it's a medical thriller. Yeah, I think in terms of the courtroom activity, and that's really the nub of the book.
Now, the second novel that you wrote, Double Blind, Double Cross, is really more about post-traumatic stress syndrome.
That's
How
right.
did you become interested in that? Is it a carryover directly from the child?
Yeah, I think it's very much a carryover. In my 35 odd years working with child abuse cases, I worked as part of a team, the child protection teams in hospitals, and they're comprised of a variety of different disciplines, including mental health professionals. And I learned so much about post-traumatic stress disorder, listening to their descriptions of what was going on in particular patients and their families. So I became, I think, pretty well versed in the issue of post-traumatic stress disorder. When it came to writing this book, I didn't want to make it another child abuse book, so I thought, well, why not make it an adult? In this case, Tom Barrett, who is a trauma surgeon, who goes to the Middle East wars and comes back after some horrific experiences with post-traumatic stress disorder.
I do want to make a note that you dedicated the book to the veterans of these wars, the Middle East wars lately in the last 15 years or so, the men who have fought over there and women who have fought over there.
Thank you for saying that.
Now, do you have a plot first or do you have a character first? How do you get into the story? How do you get into writing the book?
Well, there are two schools of thought about that, at least two. And one is to lay out your entire plot before you write one word, and others say, well, let the plot develop on its own. I think mine was sort of a combination. I got halfway through it, I had my editor take a look at it, and she said, I like the first half, but not the second half. You ought to change the second half. Because I was getting into a trial, and she said, you've already done that in the first book, you should try something different. So I had to go back and rework the second half of the book.
Now, the first half of the book is written in the first person.
That's right.
And the second half of the book is really in the third person,
That's
where
right.
Tom is viewed from the outside.
That's right.
We don't know his thoughts like we did in the first half. One thing I can say about the character and about the book, and it's probably the best thing or the best compliment a writer can get, is that I couldn't wait to find out what happened to him next.
Good.
How do you keep the story going? Are there special hooks that you have as you progress along each way, along each step?
Yeah, well, I didn't know all of the hooks as I was going along, and they sort of came to me as I did this, and also I had some editing help on that sort of thing.
And what specifically did your editor help you with?
Telling me essentially that she didn't believe that the story should move in this direction or that direction, or that a particular character wouldn't have done what he or she did.
How do you take direction? Do you take it well, or did you?
Well, you're sort of stung by it at first, and you think, well, it's my story, and then you get a little bit more mature about it, and you start thinking, well, that's right, that's the way it should be, and she's right about this, and then go ahead and make the changes that are necessary.
And she was the editor also for your first book, To Tell
Yes,
the Truth.
yes.
So you happened upon the gold mine there, so to
Well,
speak.
I really enjoyed working with her.
Yep. Now, is the main character, Tom Barrett, based in any part on yourself?
Well, part of him is a bit autobiographical, yes, but not a whole lot. I used a lot of my own background in terms of his medical training. I grew up in Cincinnati, where he grew up, went to medical school there, where he went. But beyond that, he went into surgery. I didn't. I went into pediatrics. So we're not very much alike in that respect. And most of his family history is not mine.
Well, it must have been sort of a challenge to incorporate the medical aspect, the background of your principal character, with the mystery. And can you go into, not detail, but just give us a summation about the pharmaceutical company that Tom was up against? In other words, he was in a trial that the pharmaceutical company,
That's right.
He was suffering from PTSD after he came back.
Yeah,
Why don't you go into the aspects of the plot?
Okay, well, the basic thing is that Tom comes back from the wars with PTSD. PTSD is in terrible condition, runs into an old friend, Akira Yamaguchi, who's running a clinical trial on a new drug to erase bad memories in post-traumatic stress disorder in veterans. And he enters the trial and gets better. He doesn't know for sure whether he's in the placebo or that's what the double blind is about, the placebo versus the real drug test. He doesn't know which one he's in, but he knows he's getting better. But suddenly it stops getting better and begins to be a problem, and he and others are going downhill. And Akira comes to him and asks him to help figure this out because they are completely at a loss.
In other words, he's got to get inside the compounding institute.
He's got to get inside the clinical trial where the people running the clinical trial can't. They can't be inside and outside.
Well, the compounding aspect has been in the news. I think we've all probably heard about that. Did you get any ideas from the headlines? Yes.
Yeah, the idea that the drug was being compounded by a particular group, I called them the Yankee compounders, turns out that they probably were doing their job very well, which is different from what's in the headlines. But they had to figure out whether it was something wrong with the drug pharmacologically. Is there something wrong with the actions of the drug within the body? Or was it has something to do with the development of the drug, the manufacture of the drug, the delivery of the drug? Where were things going wrong? And so Tom and his fellow patients helped to try to
just
figure
two
that.
of them, I think.
Two of them, yeah, George Logan and but anyhow, they enter a fairly harrowing experience to try to find out what's going on. And without giving it too much away, they run into some major obstacles.
Well, that's what a writer does, a novelist does, is it sets down one obstacle after the other. Trouble, 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 to keep us guessing how he's going to surmount that obstacle in the road.
Right, right.
Yes, it went well. It was a good read. Now, who are some of your favorite authors? Who did you really, obviously you went into the thriller direction, but before you started writing, who were some of your sort of heroes in there?
Well, I've been reading John le Carré since he started writing back in the 70s, and I've read, I think, nearly everything that he's written. More recently, I've been reading a lot of Ian McEwan because of, first of all, his Atonement book was a blockbuster and a movie. And then there was a book he wrote called Saturday that I loved because it was
about a doctor.
It was about a doctor, and it was all about one day, and it was a pretty exciting and scary kind of well-written mystery. I love Michael Connelly. I think his books are outstanding. I read John Grisham, although I must say I get impatient with him sometimes, but he's got a good formula because he's doing very well.
Well, what is the formula for a thriller or a mystery? What is the, everyone talks about the hook, where you really need a hook. Is that overrated, or does that,
well,
is it the writing itself? Is it the progression? Is it the storyline, the character development? What really makes a good thriller?
Well, it's all of those things. I do think you need a hook at the beginning. You got to get somebody interested, I think, in the characters. I think the characters really, for me at least, have to be well developed and credible. And if they're not, I get disinterested in the book quickly.
Right.
So I wanted to develop good characters. But I think the story is what carries the book from start to finish, and you have to have a good storyline, a good narrative arc, as they put it.
Do you write in chapters, by progression, or do you write a little bit and then go to the end of the book and write the ending of the book, for instance?
I write in progression. I'm a pretty linear thinker, and I'm a pretty linear writer also.
All right. If you have a problem, you need to solve it right then and there.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's the research aspect.
That's the doctor in you, I guess.
Well, maybe I don't know what comes from.
Do you miss the medicine that? Well, you still have your hand in it.
I still have my hand. I'm still in communication with most of my former colleagues in a more passive way than I was before. But yes, I'm still interested. I read the current literature still, and wonder what's going to transpire over the next few years in terms of child abuse field.
Sure. Do you have a particular hero, either in the medical field or somebody who you certainly admire?
Well, living or dead.
Either one.
I think one of my real heroes was Charles Janeway, who was the chief of pediatrics at Boston Children's Hospital, under whom I trained. Outstanding person. I don't want to go into too many different names because there's Bob Haggerty. There are many people that have helped me along the way that I think are wonderful people. But it would be too long a list to try to list.
Yeah. If this was to be a screenplay or a movie, do you have any idea who you'd like to see play the principal character?
Well, he'd have to be 30 years old, handsome, 6'4", and I don't know who that is anymore. I know the ones that I used to like in that role would be Tom Hanks, but he's getting a little long in the tooth for this particular role. I think I would love. In my first book, I had Daniel Day-Lewis in mind as the person who was going to play a part called the Professor in the book, and I had other people in mind for.
There's a romantic
characters.
twist in this book as well.
Yes.
You have a good combination of the medicine, the thriller aspect, and then the romantic. It's not really a sidebar; it's an instrumental part of the story.
Yeah, well, Tom falls in love and starts living with Cynthia Billings, who is the head nurse of the emergency department at Boston Medical Center, and he lives with her for 4 years before he goes to the Middle East. And when he comes back, that relationship is stressed, and it is stressed because of his stress. And I think this also elucidates some of the issues that happen in patients with post-traumatic stress disorder. Their relationships when they come back from the war are awfully strained and sometimes don't go very well. Who's
susceptible to post-traumatic stress syndrome? I know that sounds like a generic sort of question, but obviously the veterans, but people also, issues from their childhood that come front and center years later.
That's right. And although this is about post-traumatic stress disorder in a veteran or a military background, people from all walks of life have post-traumatic stress from all kinds of experiences. So it isn't restricted to this. Right now we're well, should I say we're flooded with people coming back from the wars with this.
Mm-hmm.
But the ones that that are most susceptible to this, in answer to your question, are the people who have had adverse childhood experiences, so-called ACEs, that have been studied very, very extensively, led by Vince Felitti, who was an internist out in Southern California. And it turns out that people who have had more than 4 adverse childhood experiences are much more likely to have post-traumatic stress disorder if they're exposed to a traumatic event in their life as adults. And, you know, adverse childhood experiences can be abuse, can be death of a parent, it can be a death even of an animal, of a pet. It can be a divorce, it can be multiple moves, it can be a variety of things of that sort. So if you add up the stresses in a person's life and you get beyond 4, the chances of their having PTSD and other kinds of medical conditions as well grows.
What is the prognosis for the future with PTSD and its treatment?
Well, I think it's good. I think it's better than it's been. I think that new treatments are coming along. Now, the drug that is in this book, Nepenthe is what I call it, is a fictional drug, so that it's not real. But I think there will be, it grows out of some experiments that have been done on rats that shows that this drug has promise. It hasn't been subjected to clinical trials yet, but I'm hoping it will be in the future. So that lies down the road. But there are new treatments, both psychiatric and psychological treatments, as well as various other modes of treatment that are proving to be much better than they used to be.
Now, as far as your writing fiction goes, you seem to tackle in each book a certain issue, child abuse and then PTSD. What are your plans for the future?
Well, I'm trying to decide whether to write about vaccines and the anti-vaxxer movement in this country, which I find to be very disturbing, because vaccines, if there's one thing that has been successful in our medical history, it's the onset of vaccines. So I'm thinking about doing something about vaccines. Depending on how successful this book is, I've thought about a sequel to this book. At the end, Tom is in a position to set up a nonprofit organization that could look into the pharmaceutical industry and some of its practices.
Well, there's certainly a lot of room for whodunit in that spectrum. Yeah. If you could have written one book, what book would that be?
If I could have written one that's been written, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a tough question. I just can't answer that. I'm not sure I could answer that.
But you're continuing to do textbooks. You've written a lot of textbooks in your past work.
I have gotten to the point where I've turned the textbook editing over to some younger colleagues. I'll be writing prefaces in the future and not doing much of the editing itself or the writing of the chapters.
Now, you give some acknowledgments at the end of the book. Can you go over that a little bit about people who have helped you along the way?
Sure.
I mean, you know, we do work independently as writers, but also you get a lot of help along the way, and I think you tip your hat to several people there.
Well, the reason is they did help me considerably. In the first book, David Deacon, who's a prosecutor in the Boston area, read from cover to cover the book before I submitted it for publication and gave me lots of good advice. Tracy Hart, who was my editor, Michael Grossman, who's my publisher.
And he's with what company?
It's called the eBook Bakery. It's in Rhode Island, and he's very, very helpful in putting the book together, and the mechanics of putting a book together.
Right, getting you an editor.
Exactly, and a cover artist in this particular case. Dr. Jessica Wolf, who is a PTSD specialist and worked with
Yeah.
the Veterans Administration for many years, helped me at the early stages of this book.
Right.
Judge Kirkman, who is a judge in Martha's Vineyard, I asked him for some advice about some of the legal aspects of this book.
Yeah.
Dr. Richard Cohen, who is also a retired appeals court judge.
Yeah.
Charles Gill, another judge. I leaned on my legal profession friends to
Wow.
help me avoid pratfalls there.
Right. How can people order the book if they're interested? And I hope they will be. How can they get the book?
Well, the book is available through Titcomb's. It's available through Eight Cousins.
Now, Titcomb's is the
Titcomb's
book
is the
storage
book
sandwich. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Eight Cousins is in Falmouth, and I think most bookstores could order the book. I mean, it's available through Ingram's and
Yeah, and Amazon as well.
and Amazon. You can buy it from Amazon directly.
Right.
I'm trying to give the local bookstores the nod
Yeah,
because I
sure.
think they do a wonderful job.
Yeah, they're coming back now. the
I was reading about that today,
yeah,
actually.
They've found a way
Yeah.
to keep their niche alive.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, it's been a great discussion. I wish you a lot of luck with your next book. As I mentioned, I really was excited to find out what was going to happen to the character next, your main character. Had an interesting ensemble of characters that all added to the story. So it was a great read.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me on the show.
And I wish you plenty of luck with your next book.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.